Well, I want to acknowledge that on behalf of the Lake George Arts Project, that our programs and events that take place in the Courthouse building and also in the adjacent Shepherd Park are the ancestral homeland of several indigenous people, the Mohicans and the Mohawk and others. And in recognition and respect of this history, we're committed to dismantling the ongoing legacies of colonialism, and we wish to support and empower and partner with indigenous artists and communities. And I also want to say this is a work in progress, our acknowledgement, so please, your feedback is definitely welcome. I welcome Jeremy Dennis, our current exhibiting artist at the Courthouse Gallery. Your work is amazing. We're so excited to have your work in the gallery. I have a little cheat sheet for Jeremy. Has accomplished so much. He has a lot of projects going on, a lot of work in the last couple of years. He's a tribal member of the Shinnecock Nation in Southampton, New York, where he was born and raised. And in his work, he explores indigenous identity and culture and assimilation. And he's earned his BA in studio art from SUNY Stony Brook, and he earned his MFA from Pennsylvania State College and State College, PA. And there are so many awards. I'm just going to name a couple of things. He was one of 10 recipients of a Dream Starter grant from the national nonprofit organization called Running Strong for American Indian Youth. And he received a $10,000 grant, which has allowed him to pursue this huge project called On This Site. He uses photography and an interactive online map to showcase culturally significant Native American sites on Long Island. Also, he's got there's so many awards. Other noteworthy awards are the Creative Bursar Award from Getty Images, and he's had many artist residencies, including Yaddo over in Saratoga Springs, Birdcliff Colony in Woodstock, and the Vermont Studio Center, which was hosted by the Harpo Foundation. He's had many solo exhibitions. He's had many group exhibitions, solo exhibitions. A couple of noteworthy ones are the Parish Art Museum Roadshow. He's shown his work at Stony Brook University, solo shows. These are all solo shows. SUNY College at Old Westbury, the Flecker Gallery at Suffolk Community College on Long Island, and the Suffolk County Historical Society in Riverhead, New York, and also the Zoller Gallery in State College, PA. And another thing that Jeremy's done, I hope he's going to talk about this a little bit in his talk. During the pandemic, he's took on a huge project of renovating his grandmother's house, and he is starting an artist residency there called Ma's House, which is another huge project. And so without further ado, I'm going to let Jeremy take it away. How's that sound, Jeremy? There you are.
That's a great introduction. Thanks so much. Oh. And it's a great honor to be featured at the Lake George Art Project and to present tonight. I wish we could have all been together in person, but I think the pandemic is still lingering, and I think having it on Zoom is just as nice as well. So again, my name is Jeremy Dennis. I'm from Shinnecock. I want to talk a little bit about Shinnecock itself to give a little bit of context behind my work and where it comes from. I also want to talk about maybe a handful of images from the exhibit and what inspired them. And so I hope in total I'll try to rush through the slides, because I'm really curious if there's any comments or questions about any of your feedback. And so I want to start by saying happy Native American Heritage Month. And because I'm so much into mapping, I want to start with this illustration by David Bud Martin. This is a illustration by another Shinnecock artist. He's a generation before me, but he did this beautiful illustration of Long Island's 13 indigenous communities from Brooklyn to Montauk. And I put a blue star approximately where Shinnecock territory is today. So it's only a small sliver. It's only about a mile north to south. But as you can see, if you're familiar with Long Island, our land once spanned from East Quogue or Riverhead all the way up to Sag Harbor and Bridgehampton. And so it's a fraction of what it once was. And I always like to start with some sort of land acknowledgement, just because there's so much that is possible through the land itself. And it's a important reminder of the historic land dispossession from Native people, and also the continued legacy of colonization and the land back initiatives that are hoping to regain stewardship over traditional lands. So I'm going to start with a little bit about Shinnecock before my art. Well, this is an image I actually took at our Shinnecock Community Center, and my grandfather, Avery Dennis Sr., he was one of our elected trustees or leaders at the time, and he was instrumental in getting this building built. And so it's been up for more than 60 plus years now, but it houses our tribal offices. It has space in the middle for different wedding receptions and community gatherings. We'll probably actually have our own version of Thanksgiving in this building. It's called Nenewa. That's the Algonquin word for our harvest and gathering thanks. On the same image, if we look a little bit to the right, there's a beautiful and colorful mural. And that's actually a communal project by my mother, Denise Silva Dennis. She's a artist in her own right. And in the 1990s, she led Shinnecock community to essentially create a timeline using a visual culture. And on the left, that's our Presbyterian church. I think it's the oldest Presbyterian church in the nation, but I think when you go to different ones, they always say the same thing. They're the oldest. Going back to mapping, this is a image or satellite image of our territory today. And so we're based in the Hamptons, or the East End of Long Island, and there's many different stereotypes and expectations from that. But this is a special comparison or contrast, because you can see Shinnecock is so green, and there's some sort of harmony or balance on our territory that we steward. And if you look to the northwest and on the Barrier Beach and everything to the northeast, it's just houses on top of houses, overdeveloped, and development continues to the highest bidder. And so, as I mentioned before, the longest road, Old Point Road, is only a mile north to south, and the bottom third of our territory is marshland. So even though it is 800 square acres in total to the shoreline, it's only 2/3 of that in practicality. This is our tribal seal and our flag. It's very detailed and complex. I read a article a while ago that said nation flags should be easy to memorize, and a child should be able to draw it design-wise. So sometimes I make fun of our flag for that. But there's a lot of symbolism relating to our identity and history. The most clear symbol is the yellow background. And if you're familiar with the Native American medicine wheel, it has 4 different quadrants within the circle. They could represent the 4 directions, they could represent the 4 races of man, and many other things. But yellow is typically on the easternmost quadrant, representing the east of the planet and the rising sun. And so if we look in the center of the seal, we can see the sun rising over the ocean with those canoers on the water. We also see the 2 Atlantic right whales. We were shore whalers traditionally, but here on Long Island, the whaling industry was so severe on their population. There's only about 400 of them or less today. And there's so many other things. Maybe we'll come back to this if there's any questions. But the art or cultural side of this symbol can be seen in the Shinnecock Indian Nation lettering. So it's not normal font. That's actually called a wampum belt making. And so this is what we've been doing for thousands of years as part of our storytelling, culture, and legacy, and we still practice it today. We take the quahog, or the clamshell, on the left, and render it into these purple and white beads on the right. And quahog is a shell that's plentiful in this area, but you can only see this purple phenomenon from about New Jersey up to Maine and Canada along the Atlantic coast. So it's a very regional and specific thing that we have been doing for thousands and thousands of years, just living on the coastline. But the most famous example of it turning into maybe a historic item in museums is the Haudenosaunee Iroquois Confederacy belt, seen on the top with some of the captioning on the bottom. And my mom was a public school teacher, so she always reminded everyone that even though this is a magnificent belt, the Iroquois were up near the Great Lakes where they couldn't find this type of materials. So Shinnecock and other coastal nations are always left out when celebrating this art. And so going back to mapping, this is a pre-1859 map of Shinnecock territory. At this point, it's already shriveled down through different transactions and perhaps land thefts. But at this point, around 1859, everything in this darker tone is Shinnecock land. You can just see pretty much everything written on it is either Indian or Shinnecock in name. And actually, our primary residence was on the top left where it says Canoe Place Tavern. That was where we were living primarily during the time. But we had ancestors scattered throughout this whole area. This is actually called the Shinnecock Hills. And as the name implies, there's just such a hilly landscape, which is in contrast to the rest of Long Island. And what our ancestors used to do was bury our sacred ancestors on the top of these hills. First, for the practical reason that no one would, I guess, schlep everything to the top of a hill to go build on it, and that would kind of protect them for the future. But also the idea of wanting to rest in the afterlife and look at the beautiful water from this vantage point. So for us, we saw these hills as sacred sites, but being in the Hamptons, they quickly became desirable for real estate, both private and commercial. And so one thing that's notably missing from this map is the Long Island Railroad. And so when that came through in the mid to late 19th century, that essentially cut the land in half. And we were slowly pushed more and more on Shinnecock Great Neck, where we are today. And so this land was essentially lost through treaty forgeries, deceit, lies, and many other things. And we were told as a nation that we would be able to regain these lands that were stolen outright if we got our federal recognition, which is a government-to-government relationship with the entire United States. And so this is a photo in 2010, us at the Suffolk County Courts. This is my mom on the right. She's adorned in her regalia with very intricate beadwork. And on the left, my Aunt Darlene. And on this day in 2010, we actually joined over 570 other federally recognized tribes in this historic moment. And so this next map kind of shows you the density of all the nations, but it doesn't even say Shinnecock, so I'm sure there's much, much more. Going back to Shinnecock in general terms, we're probably most known for our powwow, which if you've never been, it's a gathering of nations. It's open to the public. We practice and celebrate our traditional foods, dance, education, arts and craft, and many other things, but essentially just a great time to see family that maybe moved on or had to travel for work or school. It's like the great gathering. And so this is actually where I started to maybe centralize or ground myself as an artist. It wasn't until senior year of my college years that I became a studio art major and finally got a 35mm camera. And so unknown to me, I was very naive and still am in some ways. But my relative, his name is Herbert Randall. He's a well-renowned photographer. He just lives right now down the road from me still today. But he's known from the 1960s Freedom Summer Initiative, where educators, mostly from like New York and New England, went down to Mississippi and tried to bring voting rights, education, and try to end segregation. And so Herbert was one of the photographers who went to document and risking his life to do so. And so he became my mentor early on in my photo career. And I was very shy at the time. I couldn't even have eye contact with people. And so I asked him, how can I go out and take portraits, even though I'm so shy? And so he told me to go out to places where people expect you to take their photo, like go to parties and go to celebrations and carnivals. But for us, we always had this annual powwow. So each powwow during this 4-day weekend, I would just go out, take hundreds of pictures, and eventually I was very lucky to go out with my godfather, Keith Phillips. He's the third on the left in the blue, but he's a golden age traditional Eastern War dancer. And each summer he just goes to powwow to powwow. There's probably 20 or 30 of them just in this region. And so I traveled with him in 2015 and gathered all these images of dancers mid-pose, formal portraits, dancers between dances. And I think I really love this style because there are more modern regalia or traditional dance clothes, but I like the style of maybe the pre-contact or early contact, the 17th century for us. And so I had this huge portfolio of images, and I started to think about what I was learning in school. I was taking my art history requirements, and normally if you're an undergrad and you're an art student, you take Italian, Renaissance, and most of art history in that period is looking at biblical scenes and how artists were rendering these different narratives for people who might not have access to maybe church education or couldn't read. And so early in my education, I learned that art is actually instrumental in education. And that can also be extended to propaganda and all kinds of things. But just the simple idea of like, you can actually learn from an image, a story or a scene or something that we value because it is art. And so I started to think about that, and I thought about like, why is it just Christian iconography? Where are all the native stories being shown? And so I took my archive of images and started cutting out different dancers. This is actually my backyard here at Shinnecock. And this is a story of two brothers, one good and one evil. And it's a creation story from Algonquin tradition describing this eternal battle. Eventually the good brother wins, but he chips away at the bad brother and distributes all these different stones throughout the country and the world. This is another example. This is from local history. We had a tribal leader named Pocahontas. He's from the Manhasset people, but he was so revered that when he died, he was brought over 20 miles on foot for his burial at another sacred spot on a hill. And so I oftentimes look to art history for inspiration and composition ideas. And so you can see this is El Greco's 1577 Disrobing of Christ, where he's actually going to his crucifixion with the procession. But in mine, it's people who respect Pocahontas. And there's a larger narrative, but I'll just show you that for now. And I started working on that series of trying to depict Native creation stories for a long time. I think I got to maybe 100 images, but really there's a Native story for every situation, every learning opportunity, and hundreds for each nation as well, and the landscape associated with them. But I started to criticize my own production of this work because if you think about Native people and how they're represented in popular culture. You might think of like Indian in the Cupboard, this magical Indian that is somehow a toy, or Pocahontas as another good example. I think she has a raccoon that she talks to or is her magical friend. So I didn't want to perpetuate this idea that Native people are just magical in the woods, being one with nature, and that's all that we are. And so I was looking at Humans of New York on Facebook and how it's such a powerful tool to tell everyday stories and very deep experiences. And so if you're unfamiliar with that, it's basically a photographer who just wanders New York City, meeting random people and asking them very deep questions, but they're typically anonymous, and sometimes they don't even show their face. But in my version, I wanted to focus on contemporary Native people who look like me. I wanted to include their name, their tribal affiliation, and I called it Behind the Dance because I noticed that when people come to Shinnecock powwow, they usually like get the ticket, they get fry bread, they put out their beach chair and then watch the dance from 30 meters away and then leave. And so they never really see or appreciate Native individuals who actually make these events possible. So I wanted to tell the stories of what goes beyond the dance. And so in 2018, I revisited documentary photography, but instead of just including any Native people at these different powwows, I wanted to do it here at Shinnecock. And so these are two different portraits. There's a couple of other ones from this Shinnecock portrait project at Lake George, but this is Shanae Bullock on the left and Vincent Cuffey on the right, both Shinnecock. And I just want to show people what we look like today, just because invisibility is such a troubling issue for all native nations. And there's a lot of reasons behind that. It's a very convenient thing to ignore Native people, because if you start to acknowledge us, you have to acknowledge that we're self-governing, that we are self-determining of our own futures, that we have treaty rights that haven't been respected, and we have land claims that could jeopardize like someone's top 1% home here in the Hamptons. And so all of that would be easy to avoid if we just pretend that we're not here. Another inspiration for this project is just going back to mapping, actually. And so I love Google Maps and just exploring from my computer. There's this feature called Google Street View. And if you click and drag this little orange guy on these blue lines, you can actually get a 360-degree view of what that neighborhood looks like. It's pretty useful if you like want to see what a public park looks like, or you want to see if the business is actually still up in that area without actually driving all the way. But as you can see on this map, there's no blue lines on Shinnecock. So as an artist, I saw the opportunity to kind of fill in my own blanks. So this image on the right isn't in the exhibit, but this is actually viewable on the website. And so I took traditional DSLR portraits on the left, and on Google Maps, anyone in the world kind of stumble upon this 360-degree environmental image. But just like our rules are in real life, I guess, in order to walk or drive on Shinnecock, you should be accompanied by a tribal member. And so I'm fully filling in these public roads and fulfilling that same rule as a community that we agreed to, that if someone's viewing it, they have to acknowledge our presence at the same time, which I think is really cool. So this is a 2018 project, but with the pandemic, I didn't want to risk being face-to-face and sitting down with an interview or sitting down for a portrait without a mask needlessly. And so I've been working on colorizing old black and white images. These are a couple of different examples, but you can kind of get lost with any family photo album. And so I really love the work that goes into like identifying, categorizing, and sharing some of our family photos. As mentioned earlier, I right out of grad school in 2016. I went to Penn State, and my mentor was Lonnie Graham, who's an accomplished photographer. And we all applied for a grant from Running Strong for American Indian Youth. It's a $10,000 grant that's awarded each year to 10 Native creatives. Our year was for art and culture. They do other years for health and sports and other categories. But we were very lucky. We applied last minute and received a $10,000 grant to basically survey all of Long Island's Native history and try to take landscape photography on each one of these sites. So if you go to jeremynative.com/on this site, you can browse at your own pace. But if you click on one of the icons or one of the shapes, it comes up like this Wikipedia style article. And so you can go to different categories and try to find things very quickly. And everything is referenced back to the source material. And so again, I'm just an artist. I didn't do a lot of the firsthand research, but I wanted to give credit to those who put in that work, and also want to allow people to learn that there are books out there, but they just haven't been typed up or digitized. So for the first time, all these old books are being put on Google and other platforms. And so the inspiration for this is, again, going back to the vanishing race myth. These are a couple of different clip outs from old newspaper articles that I found in my own research, but it essentially shows that over and over, the public is taught that whenever a Native person dies in our community, it's the last of the full blood, or the last king or queen. I don't know why they said that, but I think it's the idea that, like, if we have a tribal leader who dies, maybe we aren't civilized enough to still maintain ourselves. So there's a lot of continued stereotypes about primitivism, the idea that we're not full-blood enough, or we're too mixed race. And yet Native people are often the most critiqued for that fact about appearance. And so I have the Last of the Algonquin on the top right. I think we know the Last of the Mohegan movie, and I like to throw in the Last Samurai as a kind of a colonial fantasy, I guess. And so within the On the Site project, I have two of the landscapes as part of the Lake George exhibit. One is West Woods. This is some of our lumber area. It's only about 5 minutes driving from the reservation. This is where we have just community cookouts, where we go during the summer for swimming and canoeing, and just a beautiful place that we've preserved for future generations. And another is Napeague, which is out in Montauk, the eastern tip of Long Island. And this is a beautiful place. It's also known as the Sand Dunes in Napeague, but you can just walk for maybe 2 hours out onto this peak of land, and it just seems like you're transported into a whole new world. This landscape with the short grasses is actually very reminiscent of what Shinnecock and the Shinnecock Hills used to look like. Used to mostly just be these shrubs, but over time there were many invasive species that came through and took over. And so this is another image and site that's on the project that I think if you vaguely heard about Shinnecock, you probably heard about this site. It was also mentioned on the Daily Show with Trevor Noah. But this is a new economic development opportunity on Montauk Highway. And so there's two of these 3-story tall LCD screens that have our seal at the top. There's rented ad space in the middle. And it's really just to show that we're still here in such a prominent way, but also to generate revenue for like fixing potholes or getting tribal jobs. And so even today, because the New York State governor disapproved of this, and also the Department of Transportation, our elected officials are still being sued for this project. And I think the sum of money that has accumulated is more than $400,000 at this point. And so I think it's really cool that these different sites that are old and new are all situated on the same project. And so this is the to-do list for the on the site project. As you can see, like wherever you live, there's probably a native sacred site or historic site or place where you can still find native people being resilient today. And so everything in the red, I still have to go out and photograph and pinpoint exactly where it is, but everything in the blue and green is online for now. And so after working on this project for about a year or two, I received an acceptance for my first ever residency opportunity, which was the Vermont Studio Center in Johnson, Vermont. And so I was about to go out into the world or out of New York State and couldn't do this landscape work anymore. And so I began to wonder, what can I do? And so I came up with this project called Nothing Happened Here. This is one of the handful of images that are in Lake George Art Project. And as the title suggests, it's a series that shows people being impaled by these different arrows by unknown figures. And it's really a reflection on my experience working on this site, learning all of this Native history when I was, for the first time, when I was 26 or 27 years old. And we like to think of, even today, that America was this tabula rasa, or it was once the New World, waiting for like the next person to come and save the indigenous people, or maybe there were no native people here at all, so it was just up for grabs. And so we often, as a country, don't like to acknowledge or talk about history in this country before, like the Declaration of Independence and all the things that we're ashamed of. And so I wanted to create images that beg the question, like, if you think nothing's happening on this land before that time, maybe nothing's happening in these images as well. And just comparably, if you look at all the different expressions, no one's like in agonizing pain from being impaled by an arrow, as they should, but it's more of this psychological pain of, I guess the best way to describe it is like you left the oven on, or you think you did, and you're far away from home, so you have this dread in your mind. But the thing I think that most of these people are thinking about is the acknowledgement of, like, we know that something happened to Native people. We know that generally they experienced genocide and land loss, and we aren't really taught much more beyond that. But really, I think it's kind of hitting these people like on an idle moment in their lives, the idea that there's still something that we need to do. There's this existential or mental pain of acknowledging something, but not having the either willingness or energy or effort to actually try to resolve it. And so as a Native artist, I always try to figure out, like, how do we, as maybe like 2 to 4% of the nation's population, always stay relevant to the general population, both culturally and through history and so many other ways. And so I think this is something that kind of cements our connection, just the fact that Native history is foundational to American history, and this is all of our shared narrative, where we come from. And so to continue to live today as a country without reconciliation over not only colonization and genocide, but the history of slavery can be included as well. I think we're going to continue to metaphorically have these arrows embedded in us, have that mental strain and pain of kind of not having action. And so I also like to include like the behind the scenes, or how these images are made, because part of the creating this project was like, how can you show Native people without showing Native people. And so to actually create the images technically, I actually hold a dowel rod. So it's the little bits of wood that you put furniture together. They're just long round sticks. And so I would just poke people like 40 or 50 times and then pick the best positions so they don't overlap. And then usually add feathers at the end. And it's just like a really fun way to collaborate with other artists or other creatives to create this series. And so usually everyone's really directed, and I make the perfect pose first, and then I kind of enter into the image, and then I have to erase myself out dozens of times to create that illusion. And so it is definitely a project of like Native representation in many different layers. For the last 9 minutes, I'm going to go over 3 projects really quick. This is one called Rise. This is a 2018 project that I started at Birdcliff Colony in Woodstock, New York. So this is one of the cabins, if anyone has ever been there. It's a artist retreat up in the mountains and in the forest. Very rustic, but you're there with 10 other artists. You all stay in the same building usually. And I wanted to work with other artists again as a photographer. And so I brought my traditional regalia that I had produced. This is buckskin leather, and I also am wearing a wig. And so to create Rise, it's actually sometimes multiple self-portraits. So I have 6 self-portraits in this project, but usually in each image, it's maybe obscured my identity. Maybe I'm turned away, or maybe the long hair doesn't give it away. But it's a project that's all about, again, going back to the map, acknowledging all these sacred sites and stolen sites, and wondering what it would look like if Native people came together and reoccupied them. And so it often looks like who is trespassing or who should rightfully be on this land. Another thing that I try to incorporate is the idea of humor, absurdity, surrealism, and I look a lot to scary movies, and sometimes I just take out the scary monster or the serial killer or whatever, and just replace them with the native figure. And the idea with scary movies is that they're this supernatural monster, or they're all covered with blood or have the machete. But in my series, it's just Native people generally on their own, and they're supposed to evoke that same fear just through our presence alone. And so sometimes it is just a staged image where like you don't even know if they truly are seeing each other in this case. Other times it's like you're having a dream that you're being carried out, and maybe the fears of what interactions with Native people would look like. Other times it's kind of like this cowboy lasso type of thing, where people are trying to escape from this uprise and can't escape this Native presence or Native history. And so I think it's, well, there's a lot of different layers to why the images are the way that they are, but I think it's another successful project in my mind that I want to continue as the pandemic is behind us and the weather is good once again. But I just love the idea of just staging these images and constantly framing this idea or this question of who really belongs and who is trespassing, or who is the monster in each image. And so there's another series I'm going to quickly mention that's here at Lake George Art Project, and it's based on our 2016 and 2022 Cooper's Beach protest. And so for the past couple of years, different tribal members have been protesting the fact that we as Shinnecock people or indigenous people have to pay to access our beaches. We as Shinnecock people again, our name translates to people of the stony shore. We've been on this exact land for more than 10,000 years. But today, we have to pay either $50 a day or 500 for the season to park and use the beach. And the irony is that Southampton residents, like if you live right in the village, you actually don't have to pay. So there's a lot of issues there immediately. And so as an artist, I wanted to use, in this series, drone imagery. And so I was operating a drone and wanted to stage these images again of people going out to the beach and having a nice time in the water. And then when they return to go back to the shore, it's this absurd idea of Native people blocking them. So it's kind of a comment or reference to trickery. We have a lot of tricksters in our creation stories, and just the absurdity of like, what if this really did happen? And so it's kind of like the inverse of people blocking us from the land side, and we're blocking people from the water side, and just how kind of just stupid the whole situation is, and how easy it is to resolve. One last project I'm going to quickly mention, the last 3 minutes, is one called Ma's House. And during the pandemic, as an artist, all my like exhibits and opportunities and residencies were indefinitely canceled. And so I was home with family, and we, as a family, decided to try to renovate my grandmother's home, built in the 60s. And as you can see on the left, that's my older sister and I. And you can see behind us like the very old historic floors, the hole in the wall, and a lot of crazy things going on. And this is a home that we both grew up in. Our mom grew up in the house as well. And it was vacant for the past 5 years, just due to different water damage and utility damage. And at one point, there were even raccoons living in the drywall, just behind all the walls. And so it was in such a horrible state that no one was able to live there. And so we, as a family, decided to do a GoFundMe campaign to see if like it's even possible for us to raise funds to try to restore the home. And to our surprise, we raised over $40,000, which made the project possible. And so we all decided that instead of just making it like my home and studio, we'll try to serve artists of color, especially primarily indigenous and Black artists, just because during the pandemic, a lot of the frontline workers were either Black communities who couldn't just live off of savings, or they had to disproportionately both work on the front line and also not have like high paying jobs that have health benefits and insurances like that. And then the whole issue of the history in this country and how healing is so much needed. And I'm a big believer that the arts are a vehicle for healing and talking about difficult things. And so the project itself is at a much greater state than you can see in this image. We actually have a fully furnished kitchen in this space. We've also had more than 17 artists of color come and stay during our residency. And we've had many different workshops, public events, and exhibits. And so we're definitely in that vein of trying to maybe be a new cultural production space here at Shinnecock. And so before I go over time, I do want to leave space for questions. So I'm just going to leave my website, jeremynative.com, or a way to contact me if you have any questions beyond tonight. But I really want to thank you all for listening. This is what Native Heritage Month is all about, just learning about Native culture, thinking and seeing in a new way, and just appreciating different contributions and current day experiences. So I'll stop sharing my screen, and maybe we'll see if anyone has any questions.
Okay, gotta unmute myself. Jeremy, thank you so much. That was just fantastic. I'm just blown away by all you've done, and I see as a person and as an artist such empathy and generosity in your work. It's very moving. Um, and
Thank
I'm
you.
I'm just so impressed that during the pandemic, renovating your grandmother's house and taking on that huge project. It's just fantastic. So, and you've had 17 people so far.
Oh yeah, we have a very busy residency schedule even until August of next year. We'll have people come through 2
Right,
weeks at a time,
right,
and they usually lead their own workshops or open studios. So it's a very active and up and coming space.
right.
But yeah, it's a lot more that we do.
So great. It's so great. If does anyone have any questions? I think you can like raise your hand, or you can unmute yourself if you'd like. We can. I believe you have the ability to unmute. One thing I was thinking about was, that series, the Nothing Happened Here. It kind of like, I didn't really know, like when I first saw those images, what was going on. And then I heard you talk about it on some online talks, and then also tonight. And it really hit me. Like last night, I was thinking about it. It's like, just, you've got this humor, but you're also acknowledging that psychological pain. So there's this, it's just really weird space. And, as an artist, you're able to make that bridge between something that's very uncomfortable and humor too. So thank you.
Oh, well, appreciate that comment. I think my mom is always telling people during presentations that, like, as Native people, we don't blame anyone for what happened to us. It's more like, how do we realize or discover the connections that we have? And so it is definitely using humor as a way to connect, just because for Native people in general, we have to use humor to survive and deal with trauma sometimes. And so I always think as a photographer and artist, it's so hard to make a funny image just because you never know like what someone's sense of humor is or what they're going through at that time. And so I think for me, just producing that generates like happiness and humor for me. And then like if people start to think about it, they're like, oh, wait, I'm involved in this content and topic as well. And what can I do?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah. Well, your mom is a very wise person, as you are too. Um, and does anybody else have any questions for Jeremy? We have a shy group.
I will. I want to
Good. Oh,
thank
great.
you,
Thank
Jeremy,
you, Marianne.
for explaining the influences on your work. I've admired your work for a long time, and it was really fascinating to hear how it all evolved. And I'm curious, when you got to the artist residency programs, it sounds like you weren't exactly sure until you got there what you were going to do, and that you involved the other people, the other artists, in a kind of brainstorming. Is that true?
Oh yeah, but that's pretty common at residencies, and that's kind of the good thing as well, because like when you want to collaborate with other artists at these spaces, you kind of know that no one kind of has like that solid schedule, or people do have that time to connect. And so I think that was like a good thing to not go with a solid plan. But I think the thing that was interesting is when I proposed these collaborations, a lot of people didn't realize like what they were involving themselves into until after the fact. But I think that it kind of dawned on them like, oh, okay, that's what he's talking about. So I think it wasn't like an uncomfortable thing. I think it was more um, like I think people would have like second guessed, or I think they probably would have done it, but maybe not like in that easy, like, oh yes, of course, anything you want type of effort.
Right. So it built some trust,
Mhm.
acquired trust and built it.
Yeah, definitely a vulnerability test. Mhm.
I also love that you talked about the trickster in and like here you are holding these arrows and nothing happened here, and Now you see me, now you don't.
Hmm.
You know, I didn't realize how you made those images, and so it's interesting to. And you
Yeah.
studied you were studying computers before you went to art school. Is that?
Oh yeah, I was originally a computer science major when I went to undergrad, and
Right.
so I stayed with that for a year or two, but that definitely continues my understanding and appreciation for like website building and presentation and
Mhm.
editing your photos. So a lot of the work that I could be doing, I could be in a green screen and you could just sit in a computer lab all day. But I just like to go out into the world and like hold the objects and make it practical, and it saves time in its own way.
Yeah, it's a lot of photo editing, though.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
not so fun.
And the like the one that you had at Birdcliff with the blue light at night. I mean, it's just so they're so beautiful too, like the lighting, and some of, you know, so you're also so you're staging. How much do you direct the people? Like, how does that work? Um,
A lot of it goes back to that El Greco image. So sometimes it's just like when you scroll too much on Instagram or something, you like find that perfect composition. Other times you just go out into the world and scout locations and you find this like perfectly unique and interesting setup or object and incorporate it somehow. So it's really a mix of like luck and making art history references, and I like to do that as a like a appropriation or remix, just because Native people and culture has been misappropriated so often, and so I think there's like a little bit of leeway to pull and take. And then the other thing I like to reference is like colonization has such a interrupting role in our culture, and I like to think like there's these masterpieces from the 17th and 18th century in Europe, and what would native art look like if it weren't disrupted during these decades and generations.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So,
But I appreciate everyone's comments. I hope you all come and visit Ma's house one day, and I'll come visit Lake
oh, I'd
George.
love to.
That'd be
Yeah.
great.
So Jeremy, thank you so much. I just your generosity and your humor and showing your work at the Lake George Arts Project's Courthouse Gallery. Again, the show runs through December 17th, and gallery hours Wednesday through Friday, 12 to 5, and Saturdays 12 to 4. And we hope to see you there. And bravo, Jeremy. Thank you so much. Thank you
Oh,
so
well,
much
thank you,
for
Laura. We'll talk soon. Enjoy
yeah.
your night, everyone.
Okay, you too. Thanks, Jeremy. Bye-bye.